in 2 to 3 minutes. Thanks again, everybody, for joining. My name is Nolan Houdt, and we'll start the session here in 2 to 3 more minutes. Thanks. Hello, everyone that just joined us into the webinar on learning content modernization. We're going to wait 30 more seconds to let the last few attendees arrive and make sure that they're okay to download the webinar player, and then we'll start the session. So in about 1 more minute, we'll go ahead and start the webinar. Thank you. Okay, thank you everybody for waiting for the webinar to start. I think we have most of the attendees in that had planned to join us today. I'll go ahead and begin. Again, my name is Nolan Houdt, and I'll be helping guide us through this webinar session today. We understand your time is very valuable, so we'll keep this webinar to about 45 minutes in length. First, I'd like to sincerely thank everyone for joining us today. We really couldn't be more happy to see you all here. And as you all know, the topic we'll be covering in this webinar is learning content modernization, with a focus on maximizing the return on your investment. This webinar was specifically requested by a couple clients of ours, so I would encourage you to let us know if there's a topic you would like to see in the future, because your voices are really heard. So let's go ahead and get the webinar started with a quick background about InfoPro. I believe most of you already know a little bit about our company. But for those that don't, InfoPro was founded just over 20 years ago, and it was our goal from the very beginning that we wanted to create learning solutions which can be measured by performance. We strive to reach our goals through a myriad of solutions, ranging from mobile training, job aids, consulting, game-based learning, and our brand new learning management system called Gnosis Connect LMS. InfoPro has been rated as a top 20 outsourced learning solution provider for the past 5 years in a row, with hopes to continue this trend for the rest of the decade. And for those of you that would like more information about InfoPro, we really encourage you to check out our website at www.infoprolearning.com. Now that I've given you a quick introduction, I think it's time to formally introduce myself. Again, my name is Nolan Houdt. I'm an account manager here at InfoPro. I work out of our Seattle office, and I'll be helping to facilitate our webinar today. With me, I'm honored to have Sonia Wadwa, who is our Chief Learning Strategist. Sonia has spent her entire professional career in the L&D industry and has held virtually every job title that you could think of. This unique perspective has helped her to better understand the challenges facing stakeholders at every level in companies. Sonia has been published by several different trade journals, presented at prestigious learning conferences, and been a judge for many peer communities in our industry. And at InfoPro, Sonia guides our organization to produce the most cutting-edge learning solutions and continually reinvents our development strategy to take advantage of all of the advancements in technology and, more importantly, our understanding of how the human brain learns more efficiently. I'll shortly hand over to the controls to Sonia, but first I just want to give everybody a quick guide through the portal we're using to present the webinar itself. You can see here, these are the tools that you can use within the webinar session. And throughout the presentation, we're going to poll the audience about 2 times. You can use this toolbar here you see. You'll be able to send us your feedback on all of these polls by answering them. Aside from the scheduled polls that we have going throughout the presentation, we truly encourage your participation. So at any time throughout the presentation, please feel free to make comments or leave questions if you have anything that you'd like information on. But since we want to keep the presentation relatively short, we might not be able to get to all of the questions that you have. But I can guarantee you that if you ask a question and it's not answered in the webinar itself, we'll follow up with you personally to ensure that you have the answers that you want. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to my colleague and my friend, Sonia Wadwa.
Thank you, Nolan, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining in. So as Nolan mentioned, in my role at InfoPro, most mid and large-sized companies that I personally meet and that I hear about from my learning solutions team as they meet those customers, they seem to have invested considerably in creating training content over the years. They have spent immense amounts of time, money, and resources to create the training content in different formats, be it instructor-led training, be it online training, or be it simply documents that they are using as job aids for their teams, or maybe even mobile learning these days. This legacy content is at times owned by the L&D organization or at other times by the business units themselves. Regardless, when we begin to analyze the training materials, we can see that in most cases, they were created using the best of instruction strategies, the best of visual and design elements, and technology that was at the disposal of our client at that time. But, and most importantly, this material contains valuable knowledge garnered from the company's own subject matter experts, thought leaders, and the people that have the real practical insights into the business. However, one key reason many of these companies are talking to us is that they are beginning to realize that this legacy content is not really being utilized to its full potential. In fact, I was at a conference recently where someone shared data that on an average, corporates are carrying over 41% of what they call as scrap content. And this is across all industry verticals and all businesses, and also all types of trainings, be it technical trainings, be it sales trainings, or leadership development programs. Now, when I talk about the scrap content, I'm not referring to content that may be outdated due to the fact that your business process or the need it addresses is no longer relevant. Rather, I'm alluding to only content that's very much relevant, but it's still not being utilized. Now, what are the reasons that so much content is not being utilized? One of the most common reasons that we figure out in our analysis is that these content libraries seem to have grown sporadically, and they are spread in multiple formats, multiple templates, and there's also a lot of duplication. Let's look at the 2 types of content that you can see here listed on the screen. In case of content that was tailored to traditional modalities, such as instructor-led or classroom or on-the-job training. Number 1, the cost and logistics of delivery, as we all know, they are big challenges. Next, there is too much dependence on expert trainers and SME subject matter experts. Another key issue is that these trainings are simply not sustainable beyond that one classroom event. You have that 2-day, 3-day, 1-week-long classroom event. Beyond that, there are no means to really follow up, really keep the learning that happened in that classroom sustainable for the learners. But the biggest problem is that most of this content does not allow you to support modern L&D best practices. We all are talking about a lot of good practices these days. For example, we are talking about micro-learning or bite-sized learning, little small modules that can be pushed to learners at that moment of need beyond the classroom training. For instance, I was talking to a client a couple of months back. It's a real estate company. They had acquired an application for the real estate professionals to use during all stages of the transaction, whether it was a sales transaction or a rental. They had an over 150 slide presentation and a PDF manual that was being used in their classroom trainings. During our discussions with their stakeholders and with some of their learners, we realized that what they were really looking for was short modules that were very focused on the task at hand and provided learners support that they needed on the job, rather than that 150 page long manual and the presentation from which it was really hard to dig out information that they really needed. So essentially the point here is that your content needs to evolve constantly to keep pace with your learners' needs and preferences. And of course, it has to keep pace with changing technologies and delivery modalities. This is especially true of online content or digital content or e-learning as we call it. Content that was created using available tools and technologies, for example, say a tool like Flash a few years back. Now that content suddenly starts looking kind of a little dull. It starts looking boring, especially because our visual sensibilities are changing, the kind of interactivity that we are getting used to seeing. Everything, our expectations as learners are changing. And then another issue is the multitude of devices and platforms on which the content needs to be delivered, be it multiple browsers or be it devices like tablets and mobile phones. Content that's trapped in proprietary formats and needs plugins is suddenly becoming unusable or inconsistently usable across this multitude of devices. So what are companies doing to take care of these issues? We know that most dynamic L&D teams are already either in the process of doing a content makeover or a content conversion, or they are planning to start one. So before I move further, let's pause here for a moment, and I'll request Nolan to open our first poll to just understand your views on content conversion.
Thanks, Sonia. And I noticed that quite a few people have joined us since the introduction. Thank you for those that have been able to join the webinar. In this session, we have a couple polls planned. This is the first poll. Please use the tools that you have on your screen to answer this. The poll that we have is, what type of makeover or content conversion is your organization planning on starting, in the near future? Or you might be going through one right now. You might be currently updating some of your content. And we'd like to know all of those that you currently are going through or plan to in the near future. This is a multiple select option, actually, so you can choose all of them that apply. We'll give about 30 seconds for you to answer this question, and then we'll share the results with everybody. So please go ahead and select all of these options that apply, and we'll talk with you shortly. Okay, we'll just give about 10 more seconds to let everybody answer. Oh, see that we still have a lot of votes coming in, so we'll wait until that slows down, and then we'll go ahead and present the answers. Okay, awesome. Well, we had a very nice response to the poll, so I really appreciate everybody, interacting. And again, we encourage your interaction throughout the webinar. We can see here the answer to what type of makeover or content conversion is your organization experiencing or planning to start. The top one that we see here is making e-learning content media rich and interactive. This is definitely a hot item for a lot of people. Second, followed up closely by that, conversion of classroom content to e-learning or blended mode. And third, migrating e-learning from one technology format to another. It's very nice, actually, to see that only 13% of you, are saying we don't plan a makeover at all. I hope that that percentage probably already done a makeover themselves, or maybe plan to shortly. So those are great results. Again, thanks everybody for participating.
Okay, so thank you, Nolan. So the poll that we did and the results we heard from Nolan definitely reinforce our belief that modern organizations understand the inherent value of their learning assets, of their content. And they are definitely bracing themselves to realize the benefit of current technologies or current delivery mediums, whether it's mobile or collaborative learning, and they really want to reach out to their audience in a more effective and efficient manner. But, and that's a big but, in this excitement of giving that much needed makeover, did we think how soon we may be investing in another makeover? Maybe to keep pace with technology, to keep pace with our learners' changing preferences, or to keep pace with the younger generation that's entering the workforce, to maybe keep pace to comply with some new standards? What is the guarantee that in the next couple of years, there won't be another wave of changes that will require one more overhaul of your content? Is there a way to break free of this cycle of redeveloping content every time there is a change in delivery formats or any other possibilities? How about when the content changes itself? For example, a product or a process on which you've created a training, that changes. You have to change content. You have no choice at that time. At that time, do you again go through the painful process of either recreating the content all over again, or do you struggle to find portions that can be reused? Reuse, and that's a key word here. A lot of people are skeptical about it, and rightly so. They say that it's nice and easy to talk about reuse when you have a few courses or trainings and all of them created and owned by the L&D team. But it's not practical when organizations have thousands of hours of content created at different times by different people, and the content has different owners. It's simply not worth the effort to search through all that content and identify possibilities for reuse. But this is where the good news lies. When going through what we call as the makeover or a conversion exercise for your content, you need just that little bit of extra effort to not only make your content ready for future reuse, but you can open up many more possibilities. We'll talk about those possibilities in a minute. For now, let's look at some of the ways in which we can achieve reuse and the other benefits. Now, when we allude to content modernization, instead of simply saying your content makeover or a conversion, the key difference, and this is the real key difference, is that we do not make changes only to the format of the content, but we also make architectural changes to the content. And in the next few slides, I'll talk about some of the key architectural changes that my team has suggested to our customers during several of our content modernization projects. And I'll also try to share some examples of our experiences when working on these projects. The first and very important architectural change, granularity. Granularity essentially involves making the content modular at a level that allows it to be searched, combined, and used to address different learning needs. It's very similar to the way today's music is recorded. Each track of a song is separate and can be mixed and blended with other tracks in multiple ways. Compare this with earlier music when the whole album was one piece. Does it sound familiar? Just like our old pieces of learning with long modules, long chapters or topics, as we used to call them, that encompassed multiple objectives and that used to teach and focus on multiple skills. So coming back to the example that I shared about a real estate company, one of the key changes in approach that we suggested to them was to make small, bite-sized learning simulations, each of which was based on an essential task that people need to perform in the application. So instead of one topic or one module teaching a complete screen of the application, of the software application, we created small modules that were focused on specific tasks that people were used to perform, that people need to perform in that application as part of their daily job. The advantage that the client is gaining by following that approach is that now instead of everyone going through the same 3-day-long class, they're able to pick and choose these bite-sized modules on the basis of a pre-test. And then learners need to spend time only on the areas of the application where they did not do well on the pre-test. In the long run, the client also plans to make those modules available as reference material or as job aids that can be picked up by people when required. People can just go ahead and pick up a particular module, look at a particular simulation, or do a small little practice using that simulation, and then come back to the real application that they are using. Another key aspect of modernization is tagging of content. We've all used tags and metadata at some point of time or the other, so I'm not going to define what is metadata. We've used metadata in our learning management systems, in the tools that we use for development of content, whether it is something simple like Microsoft Word or PowerPoint or Acrobat, or even in some of your recent rapid authoring tools. They all provide facilities for tagging of content. However, the question here is, to what extent are we able to use this metadata to really search through and pick relevant content and or reuse pieces of content? I have seen some large metadata repositories being maintained by some organizations. Some of our large clients, they maintain massive amounts of metadata, and they have big applications to do the same. But unfortunately, not much reuse has come out of those. So in my view, a couple of things become extremely critical when we use metadata. First, I think we should expend efforts only in creating metadata that's relevant and will realistically help in content search and reuse. And once we have decided the kind of metadata, it must be made descriptive enough, otherwise it's not really useful, not really relevant. Another point about using metadata, and it's more of a word of caution than anything else, that's about the level at which you tag content. That level becomes as important as the variety or the relevance of your tags. And this level should be decided at the time of initial analysis of the content, when we're really trying to figure out in what direction our modernization project is going to take. And that is something which Nolan will talk about towards the end of this session. For example, you may decide that you want to tag your content down to the last image or the graphic or animation that you have. Or you want to tag every screen, or maybe at times tagging at the level of one topic or one objective. That matters more to you.
And sorry to interrupt here, Sonia. This is Nolan again. I was really curious to know, of the attendees that are joining us here today, we don't have a poll assigned to this for the webinar, but I'd really like to know how many of you are currently using, descriptive and relevant metadata to tag your content. I know that, it's kind of a toss-up for most of the organizations that I speak with. So if you could simply just answer a yes or a no using the chat bar in the webinar screen itself, we'd love to learn, how many of you guys are actually using this practice of tagging your content for reuse. Sorry to interrupt, Sonia. I was just, curious to see what the audience was currently doing.
No problem, Nolan. I think that was an excellent idea. So please feel free to keep entering your comments. Meanwhile, I'll just move on. Alignment of competencies. It doesn't technically sound like an architectural change in the content itself. But if we achieve this, it's really a game changer. Now, what exactly do we mean by aligning content to competencies? It's simply making sure that the granular modules that you created address actionable job competencies instead of just addressing what we are used to calling as objectives. Once this happens, then you are able to link the content modules with your HR and talent management systems and use your content dynamically. Here, again, let me share an example. One of our clients, that's a not-for-profit organization, they're working with us on a modernization project where, in addition to making the content modular, we are mapping it to the competencies for each role in their talent management system. The end objective of this exercise is to be able to create personalized training plans for individuals. And let's see how. They have this competency assessment system as part of their talent management system. So that system throws up databases, a 360-degree assessment of people's skills, of their competencies. So once that throws up data, that data is going to be consumed by the learning management system to push to employees training modules that address only the areas that they are weak on, only the areas where their competency level has been rated as below a certain benchmark by the competency assessment system. So this is part of a larger personalized learning initiative. And that's a project that I'm personally very excited to be part of. And now the most key architectural change that is going to really allow you to derive the maximum value from content. That is separation of different layers of content. And many of us are, it's nothing new to many of us. We're already doing it. Many of the tools that we use for development also do provide us this ability. But the fact is how well are we using this ability. The first layer here is the content itself. That's the text, the graphics, images, interactive objects, animations, videos, etc. Any kind of content that you are using in your modules, in your trainings. The second layer is the structure of the content. And by structure, I mean the way your content is chunked, the way it's organized into granular self-contained units. And lastly, the content presentation. And content presentation meaning the style in which your content is presented, whether it's the colors, the screen layouts, navigation elements, essentially all the elements of your user interface. Now, if you are able to achieve separation of these layers, it allows for true reuse, and also makes long-term content maintenance much more sane. And I'm going to come to content maintenance issues in a bit. But before that, let's pause once again, because we will now move on to benefits. Let's pause once again and try to understand what are the key benefits that you are looking for from a content modernization project. So over to you, Nolan.
Thanks, Sonia, and been very, very good information so far. I hope that everybody is getting some great value from what Sonia is presenting. A question that we would ask of you, though, is we'd really like to understand what is your highest priority for modernizing content? What is really pushing that ball forward in your organization, that tipping point, if you would, where you say, this reason alone would be enough for me to modernize my content. So please select just one of these options this time, which is going to be the highest priority for you for modernizing your content. Again, we'll give around 30 seconds or so for people to answer. Thank you. Okay, we're still getting a couple answers coming in. We'll wait about 5 or so more seconds before we go ahead and show the results. Okay, great. So this is the answer from the poll question from the audience of which of these is your highest priority from a content modernization perspective. We can see actually it was an exactly even split. The top 2 reasons for people modernizing their content is long-term maintenance and updates, for one, and second, one source content for delivery across multiple channels. So again, those were the top 2 and pretty consistent with what we're hearing. Thanks again, everybody, for participating in the poll. Sonia, back over to you.
Thank you, Nolan. So I'll take a few more minutes now and talk about each of the benefits that you saw listed in the poll question. Number 1, searchability. Imagine having the ability to search through your content assets at a much more granular level. Not only you as a trainer or a learning developer or as an instructional designer can search and reuse. It also builds a strong base for just-in-time or on-demand learning. Learning that allows your learners to search for learning objects that meet their specific needs. And I think that's the most effortless form of learner engagement. It's a little hard to imagine in some cases, but I am seeing a lot of clients really thinking in that direction and moving towards a more where learners are able to pick and choose learning at their own as per what they feel is right for them. It may not work for every organization, but yes, it's an excellent possibility. Next is contextualization. Now, what do we mean by contextualization of learning? Simply speaking, it's the ability to use the same learning object in different ways, depending on the context. For example, the context could be formal training, whether it's a classroom training or it's an online training requirement. It could be a job aid that is available to the learner in that moment of need when they are doing their job. It could be an information snippet that's pushed to employees when, for example, some features change in one of your products. Once we are able to separate the content from presentation, the different layers that we talked about, it allows the learning assets to be combined in different ways to address a particular learning context or an objective. And again, coming back to the example of music, just as different music tracks can be mixed and matched to create remixes of songs. Let's take one example here. For example, say you've created a practice simulation to use a piece of hardware. The simulation could be part of an e-learning module where it is being used by the learner to practice using, playing around with that hardware equipment. It could be used by an instructor in a classroom environment to demonstrate the functionality of that same hardware. Another way it could be used is as a standalone job aid for employees to refer to when they're actually working in their real-life environment. And that's what we mean by contextualization. And once you have your assets broken down to a decent modular level, a granular level, and searchable, of course, you can really make use of the same asset in multiple ways. The possibilities are really endless. Now let's look at portability. And probably from an ROI perspective, from a return on investment perspective, this is the most attractive. The ability to publish for multiple delivery modalities from a single source. Once you are able to keep your content, presentation, and structure as separate layers, and I keep coming back to that one architectural change, keep all of these layers as separate, you can achieve true portability. And portability means what you saw in the post, develop once and deploy anywhere. Again, I'll try and share this more with the help of an example. A recent experience that we had was with a Fortune 500 company that provides learning to a global audience. And this audience is not just their own employees, not the corporate's own employees who work within and use the company's own infrastructure. Rather, the audience is a very, very diverse set of college and university, and sometimes even high school students across the globe. One key implication of this diversity was the availability of internet bandwidth and infrastructure. In some parts of the world, the bandwidth availability was extremely poor, whereas in other parts, technology usage and bandwidth were not an issue at all. And then there was a third set of audience, somewhere in between the two, who, when they had bandwidth, was pretty good. At other times, they had challenges. So they had sort of intermittent bandwidth availability. So the challenge here was to equip the college and university teachers to teach these students in several different ways, to have the flexibility to be able to teach as per the infra and the challenges they were dealing with. In some places where they had limited bandwidth and also a very limited number of computers in the classroom. We in the United States probably are not used to that limited number of computers in a classroom, but then there are countries like those. So in those places, teachers wanted to teach in the class and probably they needed more of hard copies, more of actual paper-based content. Then there were other cases where the content was, the wish was to have the content totally online, and also using a flipped classroom kind of a model. Our client wanted to have the flexibility to provide all these modes of learning. They wanted to provide online, completely online, partially online, only in the classroom on paper, and so on and so forth. And also, one other thing on the wish list was they wanted it available on tablet devices. But they did not want to make this content creation and maintenance a nightmare for themselves in the long run. So the solution that we created for them allows for all the source content to be in one location and one format. with the ability to publish it into 3 different formats. So I'll just tell you what the 3 formats were. The first one was, and that was the simplest format, was what we call as a PDF to go. This was a simple PDF file of each topic with all the visuals, the text, and the notes for every slide of the course. This was very useful in geographies with poor bandwidth, as teachers were able to hand out printed copies to the students. The second format was what we called a vodcast. And vodcast was a mobile video of an entire topic that could be downloaded when students had access to high bandwidth. And this was being used, in places where the bandwidth availability is kind of intermittent. So when they had bandwidth, they would download it and then easily view it offline. And the additional advantage of using this video format was that it could be played on tablet devices as well as computers. And the third format was what we all see most often, that was an interactive piece of e-learning. That was intended for use in geographies where students and colleges had excellent bandwidth and classrooms with computer availability for each student. Now, there were a couple of reasons we know that the client wish list was that they wanted to have one source and not have a nightmare in terms of maintenance and deployment. But there were a couple of reasons we suggested a single source of content. Firstly, the nature of the content that this organization is teaching is such that it needs frequent changes. There are version changes, they're teaching some software, some technology, so there are frequent version changes, so the content needs to be updated accordingly. So imagine if the source was in multiple formats. The maintenance would have been impossible. And the client's content management team was simply not geared up to handle the volume of maintenance and changes. Second, the client is also planning to very soon translate this content into multiple languages. They had last I heard, about 8-10 languages on their list. And they plan to crowdsource this translation. Once again, having one source with different layers for content and presentation, it has allowed us to create a model wherein all the translatable, all the elements that need to be translated, they can be moved into translatable files. And after the translation, after the localization, they can be imported back into the source to create one version of the source for each language. Coming back to where we started, and I think we already talked quite a bit about maintenance in the previous slide. Long-term maintenance of content can be made much more sane and much more easy, whether it is to address new instructional requirements or to keep pace with ever-evolving technology and the deployment environments. I already shared with you the examples, so I'm not really going to go much deeper, but I would like to share a couple of words of wisdom from one of my friends who is a learning technology expert. He likes to put it this way. He says, your content is truly maintainable if it is able to survive its platform. And I couldn't agree more with that. So we looked at all these benefits, and obviously they seem to make a lot of sense, and in your poll you also shared your preference about the kind of benefits that you would be looking for. And definitely content modernization seems like a real return on investment. But I have a recommendation here. Before taking a decision to embark on a content modernization project, learning executives must ask themselves and their stakeholders, of course, and including the learners, some key questions. And you can see some categories that I have listed out here. So what we have done at InfoPro is we've categorized the kind of questions that you should be asking yourself and your stakeholders into some categories. And we've created a sort of a guidebook to use when we discuss modernization needs with our clients. During discussions and interviews and surveys with business users or with learners or with subject matter experts and content owners, our team tries to use the guidebook to get answers to all the questions. For example, some of the key questions are around the life of the content. As in, do some parts of the content need to be retired rather than even making an attempt at modernization? For content that needs to be modernized, what kind of blend are you really looking at? What kind of blend makes sense according to your user demographics? What may be your specific technology adoption challenges? What kind of technology platforms are you ready to use, and how do they integrate with other technologies in your organization? How about your long-term maintenance needs? Do you really have the kind of maintenance needs that I talked about a couple of slides back? And how about related changes like localization or translation of content? Do you really need that? And if you need it, how often does that happen? Then some other important issues like, are you looking at your content to be compliant to any kind of standards? For example, maybe 508 standards, they are accessibility standards. So there are a whole lot of such questions that, if answered at earlier stages, will help keep your modernization project within budget, and of course, you'll be able to finish in time. So I've tried to share my experiences and learning on modernization projects, and I really hope some of this was useful to you. Now I'll hand over to Nolan, who would like to wind up by sharing with you a recommended process that we follow at InfoPro.
Thank you, Sonia, and we really appreciate you sharing all of the information. What I'm going to do, as Sonia mentioned, is share with you our 3 stages for modernization. Now, we have coined this ICAM, which stands for InfoPro's Content Asset Modernization, and we've broken it out into 3 separate steps. And this is really the how. You know, if you were listening to Sonia's webinar, a lot of this was what. So what is content modernization? What does it mean? What are some of the benefits? This is the actual how. How do we do this in application? We start with the content itself and that instructional strategy. Sonia talked a lot about contextual tagging, enhanced interactivity, localization, things along that with actual content. That's the very first place that we start. Once we have our entire plan around that, then we get into the actual media itself. So how can we spruce up the look and feel? How can we make the design better? How can we use different forms of media? How can we, you know, example these days, really, how can we use video to empower and to deliver our message in a better way? And then the third part is that technology modernization. You guys actually mentioned it as one of your top priorities, right? Being able to make content, you know, in one place, but then publish through several different devices, whether that's a tablet device, a desktop, iPhone, you know, really whatever it is. And so we follow this very, very defined 3-step approach. And we actually have a process documented around this entire thing that has really helped companies put a game plan around modernizing their content instead of just approaching it as, well, it looks outdated, we need to make it better. And what we'd like to invite you to as well is if this is of interest to you, if you're really wondering, okay, how can this work within my company? First of all, we'd like you to feel free to reach out to us directly. We can sit down with you, Sonia, or one of our other learning experts in the company, and walk you through our process and specifically talk about what's going on within your company. Also, we're going to hold a webinar on this, on the how we achieve this, here in the next couple months coming up. So look out for that information as well. You know, with that, I'd like to go ahead and close our presentation on content asset modernization for this round, and I'd like to open it up for questions from the board. So if any of you have any questions, please use the comment bar off to the right and type those in. Again, we're trying to keep the webinar to about 45 minutes in length or so, and we have about 4 or 5 minutes left of that. So we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. Again, those that we cannot, we'll go ahead and answer those offline directly through those. So we'll give a couple minutes to let some questions come in. Okay, and I'll go ahead. I just had the first question come in, and I'll ask this while we're waiting for more. First one is, what are the costs of content modernization as compared to content conversion? This is a very, very on-the-point question here. Again, Sonia, if you could help us answer this. What are the costs of content modernization compared to content conversion?
Sure, Nolan. I think that's a very good question. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the session, though the amount of work that you put into making the architectural changes for true modernization, that seems quite a bit, you know, all the stuff that we talked about in terms of architectural changes. But the overall cost, I would say, is not way above what you would spend if you were to go in for a simple conversion or a makeover. This is because once you've spent time and effort to analyze your training assets initially, especially as per the process that Nolan just talked about, and you've taken your decisions about the architectural changes, there are typically no surprises at later stages. And you are able to make your changes, do your content modernization in a structured manner, especially if you stick to a process. And also, and more importantly, any additional cost of modernization, you may spend a little bit more time or effort, but that additional cost is offset by the benefits that you begin to see almost immediately, especially the reuse of content assets during the modernization project itself. And in the medium to long term, you'll also begin to see other benefits such as your ease of maintenance and changes that we dealt on quite a bit. So to answer your question, Nolan, I think there is no huge difference in cost between the two.
Perfect. Thanks, Sonia. And we have another question here. This has actually been asked in a couple different ways, so I'll go ahead and take one of them. It says, how do we decide if we want to modernize, or should we start a new content development project? So, in other words, we're kind of in this process where we don't know if we should throw out everything and start over with new development, or should we take what we currently have and build off of that content?
That's a tricky question. A good one, but a tricky one. Okay, so I'll try to answer that. I would say the line between simple conversion and modernization can sometimes be very fine. So this decision really depends on several factors. First and foremost, you really want to figure out the current utilization of the content, and if possible, its impact on your performance outcomes. You want to go in for modernization only if it makes business sense for you. For example, you may have challenges with an increasingly mobile workforce, or your utilization has gone down because of issues with logistics of organizing classroom sessions. You definitely need to think seriously about giving new life to your old content. I would say, another situation maybe when you begin to evaluate your current assets, you realize that there is a large number of assets that should be retired just because the content areas are no longer relevant. In this case, modernization of those assets without really planning, without really thinking about, obviously it's a waste. And sometimes, I think of modernization being kind of akin to going in for a change in your wardrobe or your hairstyle. There are times when you change your hairstyle out of sheer boredom. I know I do that, and to feel good with a new look. But a wardrobe change may be for more practical reasons, weight gain or hopefully weight loss, as they show in those ads. To really thread that thin line between practicality, usability, and look and feel. If you have a minute more, I'd just like to share about a study on change management that one of my colleagues was talking about this morning. It was conducted by a Japanese company. They changed the wall colors and decor in their office, in one section of their office, to a brighter color. And overnight, they saw almost an increase in productivity. A few months down the line, they changed the colors back to the original, the rather dull ones. So instead of the productivity going down as they suspected due to the old colors, it went up once again. It went up further. So the moral of the story was that it was the change that impacted productivity rather than the colors themselves. So how does it relate to our example? Sometimes it's a change in look and feel may make most sense for you. It all depends, like I said, practicality versus usability versus look and feel, and of course the budget that you can have.
Great. I mean, it sounds like the answer to that is really it depends. I guess is the best answer that we have, really depending on what your situation is and what your content is, and really viewing all of the content you have and measuring that up against your goals is So I think that's going to be really relative per the company. Apology that we couldn't give you a very definitive answer on that. One question that we have coming up that we won't be able to answer, I guess, within this. Is we're having a lot of questions come in about what does it cost for me to modernize this, and I'll answer that for Sonia that the cost of any modernization project is definitely a chief concern. And personally, from the projects that I've worked on, it's important that you do the extra work ahead of time to really figure out what that return on investment is going to be. because the cost is all just a function of how much content you have and what you're trying to convert it to. And at the end of the day, we can help you, and even we can help you budget it internally to say, does it really make sense for me? Is it going to be less expensive for me to modernize this content or to create brand new content? And if I do modernize my content, what type of return should I expect to have? Really coming back to what I mentioned at the very beginning about our company is that learning for performance. Is can we move the needle enough for it to make sense for that investment? And so with that, I think we've come to the time here. I see we're ran a little bit over. I apologize for that. I would like to open it up. If you guys have any questions, please continue to put those in through the webinar. Also, a really good way to get in touch with us is through our email, where it says info@infoprolearning.com in the bottom left. You can submit any questions that you want to that as well, if you can think of any afterwards, or you can always give us a call directly at our phone number there at the bottom left. Just as a side note in closing, we're also planning on sending the recording of this webinar over to you. We would like for you to feel free to share that via any means you would like. If you have people within the organization, within your organization that want to see this webinar, feel free to share that recording with them. Or if this is a topic that you feel is primarily important for you, let us know and we can possibly do the presentation one-on-one with you. With that, again, I would like to thank everyone sincerely for joining us on this webinar. Also, Sonia, thank you for your time. I know it's valuable, but I think we really were able to learn quite a bit. So thank you for your time and presenting and for putting this presentation together.
Thank you, Nolan. It was a pleasure. And thank you, everybody, for joining.
All right, everyone. Thank you. We hope you have a great day, and hopefully we will talk with you soon. Goodbye.